Yang Yi gazed at a Nanjing while she gazed at him. At this moment it was like time had stopped. Yang Yi was just about to speak. Bang! Suddenly, an enormous explosion resounded from within the tombstones in the sky, and then all of them started to tremble violently. The gazes of every shot over while they thought to themselves, "Who's winning?" YY stretched out his hand to lightly touch a Nanjing's face as he said, "If it's possible, I would rather be lying here instead of you." He didn't wait for a Nanjing to say anything, and he immediately sent her into the primordial pagoda to be cared for by Su Qingshi, Xiao Yushi, and Xianxia. After that, he stood up, and then he raised his head and shot a solemn gaze towards the area in the sky that was covered by tombstones. Will Elder Mu be able to win the battle? He's fighting against 12 half-saints and 30 peak monarch realm experts. Bang! Suddenly, a figure flew down from midair before crashing heavily into ancient domain city, causing the entire city to quake. The pupils of Yang Yi and the others constricted because it was the Demon Emperor. A ray of violet light flashed, and then the violet mink appeared on Yang Ye's shoulder. He immediately understood her intentions and flashed over to the Demon Emperor. Yang Yi heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the Demon Emperor because while the Demon Emperor was heavily injured, he was still alive. The violet mink flew over to the Demon Emperor while worry filled her eyes. The Demon Emperor forced a smile on his face and rubbed her head as he said, "I'm fine. I just need to rest for some time." As soon as he finished speaking, the Demon Emperor gazed at Yang Yi and said, "The situation there isn't very good." Yang Ye's heart shook, and he said, "What happened?" The Demon Emperor spoke with a solemn expression on his face. Elder Mu's strength exceeded all our imaginations. He kept 11 half-saints busy on his own. Perhaps only a few in the history of our continent have possessed such strength. However, the Hallowed Grounds forces are too numerous. Both the Demon Saint and I weren't able to keep the Devil Saint and all those other Monarch Realm experts of the Hallowed Grounds busy. I was almost killed just now, and it was Elder Mu who forcefully transported me out at the critical moment. The corners of Yang Ye's eyes twitched slightly. He actually almost died in there even with the strength he possesses. Exactly how intense is the battle? Bang! Right at this moment, another explosion resounded, and then another figure flew out from there. However, that figure didn't crash to the ground like the Demon Emperor, and it landed firmly within Ancient Domain City instead. The Demon Saint. It was the Demon Saint who'd left the battlefield. At this moment, there were countless holes throughout his clothes, and his entire body was covered in injuries. He seemed to be in a rather sorry state. The experts of the Devil Race and Oceanic clans were overjoyed when they saw the Demon Saint, whereas the hearts of all the profounders from the Southern Territory fell to rock bottom. Yang Ye's heart sank a little as well. He had no doubt in Elder Mu's strength, but Elder Mu was up against so many enemies. 12 half-saints and 30 Monarch Realm experts. Such an array was faced by Elder Mu alone right now, so Yang Yi wondered if Elder Mu could be a match for them. Yang Yi took a deep breath. He was ready to ignite his sword intent at any moment because if Elder Mu lost, then an unprecedentedly bloody fight to the death would ensue. After all, they were irreconcilable enemies, and there was no way out besides a fight to the death. Yang Yi understood all of that, and so did the founding emperor, Beast Emperor, and all the experts on the Southern Territories side. So, all of them had resolute expressions on their faces, and they knew that it would be time for them to truly fight to the death if Elder Mu lost. If Elder Mu won. Actually, practically no one felt that Elder Mu could win. After all, there were 12 half-saints and around 30 peak Monarch Realm experts in there. But Elder Mu was all alone. How's the situation up there? The Demon Emperor looked up at the tombstones in the sky as he asked the Demon Saint in a low voice. The Demon Saint looked up towards the tombstones for a moment before he said, "I never expected that his strength was actually formidable to such an extent. No wonder he was able to kill Luo Dao that day. Moreover, what exactly are those tombstones? They aren't just able to take away the vitality of half-saints. They're even able to ceaselessly provide him with energy. The reason Elder Mu could fight so many half-saints and remain undefeated was mainly because of the tombstones. The demon saint noticed that the tombstones could actually ceaselessly provide profound energy to Elder Mu, allowing Elder Mu to stay at a peak state at all times. The demon emperor asked, "Does he have a chance?" The demon saint pondered deeply for a moment and said, "His chances aren't very great. Elder Mu is very strong, and his strength has far surpassed my expectations. However, that fellow Xianxia from the hallowed grounds isn't weak as well. Moreover, he has so many other experts on his side. Elder Mu is completely outnumbered. So, resolve appeared in the demon saint's eyes as he said, "So prepare to fight to the death." The hearts of Yang Yi and the demon emperor sank once more when they heard this. The demon saint was a half-saint. Since even he'd said something like that, then Elder Mu was very likely to lose. Yang Yi raised his head and gazed at the tombstones in the sky while a trace of worry appeared in his eyes. If it hadn't been for Elder Mu, then he would have died a very long time ago. He'd taken Elder Mu to be his master and even a loved one. So he didn't want anything to happen to Elder Mu. But it was a fight against 12 half-saints and 30 monarch realm experts. I'm still too weak in the end. I'm unable to help Elder Mu. Yang Yi took a deep breath as he spoke in his heart. He was already capable of surmounting his realm of cultivation to kill monarch realm experts, but he was still too weak when facing those half-saints. Yang Yi shook his head a short while later, and then he sheathed his intense sword and shouted, "Everyone from the Southern Territory, hear me well. Prepare to fight to the death. Even if all of us die, we'll make the devil race, oceanic clans, and the hallowed grounds pay a horrible price. If we survive today, then we will definitely annihilate the devil race and oceanic clans, and then attack the hallowed grounds to get our vengeance. Fight to the death." The profound energy within the demon emperor surged out madly from within him as he shouted furiously. "Fight to the death." The experts of the Grand Qin Empire responded. "Fight to the death." The demon emperor started to transform, and it wasn't long before his right hand had transformed into an enormous golden claw. At this moment, all the experts of the Dark Beast Empire who stood behind him had instantly responded, and there were even some that were prepared to detonate themselves. "Demon beasts of my demon race, listen well. Fight to the death." The demon emperor refused to be outdone. The experts of the devil race and oceanic clans revealed extremely heavy expressions when they witnessed this scene. Because if the experts of the Southern Territory were to fight desperately to the death, then even if they could win the battle, it would still be a Pyrrhic victory. Fortunately, they just had to annihilate all the forces of the Southern Territory, and then the human race and demon race would be practically annihilated. At that time, the entire continent would belong to the devil race and the oceanic clans. Bang! Suddenly, the tombstones in the sky suddenly shook violently, and then everyone watched with shock as they gradually dispersed. They were dead. The experts of the devil race and oceanic clans gasped as they looked up into the sky. At this moment, everyone was looking up into the sky. Elder Mu was standing in midair with an extremely pale countenance. There were a few palm prints on his chest, and every single one of them was very deep to the point that they'd caused Elder Mu's chest to completely sink down. It was an extremely horrifying sight. There was a pitch-black walking stick floating in front of him, but it was covered in cracks and seemed like it might shatter at any moment. Xianxia's group was standing in front of Elder Mu, and their appearances had completely changed. At this moment, all of them had snow-white hair and thick wrinkles all over their faces. They seemed extremely old. If it weren't for the imposing aura they emanated and the fierce gazes they revealed, no one would think that they were half-saints and monarch realm experts. Everyone would think that they were old men who had a foot in their graves. At this moment, all of their eyes carried unprecedented seriousness and fear as they gazed at Elder Mu, and even Xianxia was no exception. "You're actually able to rely on that tombstone to take away our vitality. The energy of time is something that half-saints can only pry into a little, and only true saint realm experts are capable of grasping such an inconceivable force. You aren't a half-saint, but you're capable of causing our lifespan to flow out of our bodies. Who exactly are you?" Xianxia stared fixedly at Elder Mu while his heart was filled with shock and terror, because he had less than 100 years of lifespan left now. However, He had over 1,000 years before the battle. Compared to Shen Kong, the Devil Saint and the Oceanic Emperor were in a worse state because they only had a few years left to live. There were others that were in a worse state, and it was those Monarch Realm experts of the hallowed grounds. Many of them merely had a few days left to live. Those Monarch Realm experts who'd perished just now had died because they'd lost all their lifespan. On the other hand, the reason these Monarch Realm experts were still alive was because their strength was slightly superior to those who'd perished. Feeling their vitality and lifespan leaking away was a feeling that was even more terrifying than death itself. So, the Devil Saint, Oceanic Emperor, and some of the experts of the hallowed grounds had decisively abandoned their assault on Elder Mu and started attacking the tombstones. Elder Mu waved his right hand, and the black tombstone appeared before him again. The corners of Shen Kong and the others' eyes twitched when they saw the tombstone, and the fear in their eyes wasn't concealed at all. Elder Mu said, "You have two choices. The first is to leave and return to your hallowed grounds. After all, I can't stop all of you. The second is to fight me right now. If all of you disregard death and fight with your lives on the line, then you'll definitely be able to heavily injure me even if you can't kill me. Of course, if I fight desperately, then all of you can dream of leaving." Shen Kong and the others had heavy expressions on their faces. None of them felt that the Undertaker was exaggerating. After all, the Undertaker hadn't lost even when fighting the joint forces of 12 half-saints and 30 Monarch Realm experts. Such strength was something that only the supreme exalts of the hallowed grounds could compare to. "Brother Shen Kong, he's weak and exhausted. We'll definitely be able to kill him if we join forces again." The Devil Saint noticed Shen Kong's hesitance and spoke anxiously. Because while the Undertaker couldn't stop the experts of the hallowed grounds from leaving, but what about him? Could he retreat to the hallowed grounds? Even if the hallowed grounds allowed him to do so, what would happen to the devil race? Brother Devil Saint is right. The Oceanic Emperor knew how serious the situation was, and he immediately spoke, "Brother Shen Kong, if we don't kill him today, then the devil race and oceanic clans will definitely be annihilated by the human race. Brother Shen Kong, please lend us a hand." Shen Kong paid no attention to the Devil Saint and Oceanic Emperor. He took a deep and long glance at Elder Mu before he gazed at the Devil Saint and Oceanic Emperor. "Come with us to the hallowed grounds. Your lifespans have almost been completely exhausted. Perhaps you'll still be able to live if you return to the hallowed grounds with us." The Devil Saint and Oceanic Emperor were first delighted when they heard Shen Kong, but it wasn't long before they realized that there was a problem. The Devil Saint said, "Brother Shen Kong, but what about my devil race and the oceanic clans of Brother Oceanic Emperor?" Shen Kong glanced coldly at them and said, "I think both of you should think about yourselves." The Devil Saint's expression changed a little, and he said, "Brother Shen Kong, if we are to leave, then the devil race and oceanic clans won't have a half-saint anymore. Wouldn't that?" Shen Kong waved his hand and interrupted, "Could it be that you think just anyone can enter my hallowed grounds? That's all I'm willing to say. Decide yourselves if you are going to leave." "Brother Shen Kong, I'll go with you." Meanwhile, the Oceanic Emperor spoke abruptly. He only had a few more years of lifespan left. So, if he didn't head to the hallowed grounds, then even if the Undertaker didn't kill him, he would still die in a few years unless he could advance into the Saint Realm. So, he had to head to the hallowed grounds because only then could he live a little bit longer. The longer one had lived, the more afraid one usually was of death. Shen Kong nodded, and then he gazed at the Devil Saint. "Ha ha ha!" The Devil Saint suddenly roared with laughter and said, "This is how the so-called hallowed grounds acts?" The Demon Emperor was right. Our profounder continent is actually just an ant in your eyes. All of you don't care about our continent at all. All of you only care about yourselves. Even your fight against the defiant profounders is only being done for yourselves. Ha ha ha! To think I was so blind. Brother Devil Saint, we've cultivated for a few thousands of years to attain the half-saint realm. Could it be that you intend to give up just like that?" The Oceanic Emperor persuaded, "You'll naturally be able to avenge the devil race in the future if you're still alive. But who will avenge them if you die?" The Devil Saint glanced coldly at the Oceanic Emperor and said, "It's fine if you're a coward who's afraid of death, but why make it seem so noble? I, Mo Lu, am no upright person, but I'm no coward who's afraid of death. If the Undertaker and Yang Yi intend to annihilate my devil race, then I'll wait for them to attack. The worst that can happen is death, right?" Xian Kong glanced coldly at the Devil Saint and said, "Let's leave." "Leave? Hee. Stay the fuck behind." Right at this moment, an arc of light flashed by, and then the heads of 2 out of the last 10 Monarch Realm experts from the hallowed grounds had suddenly flown into the air. "It's Qin Bufan." Xian Kong's expression changed drastically, and he swiftly slapped his right hand towards the ray of light before a ray of white light shot forward like a shooting star and smashed against the arc of light. However, the arc of light suddenly sped up, and it turned in midair and avoided Xian Kong's attack. "Watch out!" Xian Kong was astounded, and he hurriedly howled towards one of the Monarch Realm experts from the hallowed grounds. However, it was too late. The arc of light was extremely swift, and it flashed through that Monarch Realm expert's neck before he could even react. After that, his head flew up into the air. "Trap him!" Meanwhile, Xian Kong and the others hurriedly acted in unison. However, Elder Mu suddenly attacked as well, and a tombstone suddenly smashed down towards them, causing them to feel horrified. At the same time, the Devil Saint suddenly attacked as well, but his target wasn't Elder Mu. It was Xian Kong's group instead. "Kill!" How could Yang Yi miss such a rare opportunity? He immediately drew his intense sword, and a beam of violet sword energy shot up into the sky towards one of the Monarch Realm experts of the hallowed grounds. The Demon Saint, Demon Emperor, Founding Emperor, and all the others attacked immediately and shot towards the sky. They hadn't fought just now because they didn't have a good chance at killing Xian Kong's group, but now that a mysterious expert and the Devil Saint had joined the battle, then it wasn't impossible for them to kill these experts of the hallowed grounds anymore. "You're courting death." Xian Kong's furious voice rumbled through the air. But it wasn't long before Elder Mu appeared in front of him. Elder Mu didn't waste his breath at all. He immediately waved his right hand, and then the tombstone transformed into a myriad of tombstones that enveloped Xian Kong. Xian Kong was horrified because he'd personally experienced the strength of this Undertaker who stood before him, so he didn't dare act carelessly in the slightest. He was just about to attack when an arc of light suddenly shot towards him from afar, and it instantly arrived behind him. "Space smash!" A shout resounded from behind Xian Kong, and then the space around Xian Kong rumbled and collapsed. Xian Kong was astounded by this scene. Of course, he wasn't astounded by Qin Bufan, he was astounded by Elder Mu instead. If it was at any ordinary time, then this level of spatial collapse wouldn't be troublesome to him at all. Yet now, a wisp of resolve flashed through Xian Kong's eyes, and then he formed a strange seal before his chest and swiftly slapped it forward. Convergence! As soon as he spoke, a ray of white light suddenly swept out from Xian Kong, and then the myriad of tombstones around him were blasted apart. On the other hand, the arc of light behind Xian Kong had immediately vanished when that white light swept out. Xian Kong's aura declined rapidly after he executed that attack, and his entire countenance was ghastly pale. He glared fiercely at Elder Mu before his figure flashed towards the distance. However, it wasn't long before an arc of light appeared in front of him. Xian Kong roared furiously, "Qin Bufan, you're courting death." He suddenly attacked once he finished speaking. Elder Mu's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw the white light sweep towards him, and then he waved his right hand and the tombstone instantly expanded to cover an area of 3 kilometers. After that, it smashed against the white light. Bang! The white light was blasted apart. The half-saints of the hallowed grounds noticed that Xian Kong was being besieged, and their expressions instantly changed. They were about to attack when an enormous tombstone descended from the sky and smashed down towards them. In the distance, Xian Kong slapped Qin Bufan back, but he didn't pursue Qin Bufan and intended to flee instead. However, a beam of violet light suddenly tore through the sky towards him at the exact same instant that he'd repulsed Qin Bufan. Xian Kong swiftly looked towards the side and saw Yang Yi. He immediately spoke ferociously, You ant! I'll kill you before I leave and eliminate a latent trouble from my hallowed grounds." As soon as he finished speaking, he swiftly attacked with his right palm. A ray of white light flashed forward and collided with Yang Ye's violet sword energy. Critical strike, stage 3. Yang Ye's voice suddenly resounded, and then the violet sword energy trembled violently and glowed brilliantly. Xiankong was a half-saint, but his current cultivation was only at the 9th rank of the monarch realm. That was why Yang Yi dared to attack him. Otherwise, Yang Yi would definitely not court death by challenging a half-saint while he was at the Exalt realm. After all, that was stupid, not brave. Of course, even then, he was taking a huge risk by attacking right now. Because while Xiankong was at the monarch realm now, his accomplishments in all aspects were that of a half-saint. Even though it was a risk, Yang Yi had still attacked because he really didn't want these half-saints to return alive to the hallowed grounds. He intended to take some interest for a Nanjing before he really took revenge. Yang Yi didn't dare act carelessly in the slightest, and he utilized his strongest attack from the start. It was 3 overlapped heavenrens enhanced by the critical strike technique. The violet sword energy smashed against Xiankong's attack. Bang! An enormous explosion rumbled through the surroundings as Yang Ye's sword energy and the white light exploded apart, and then countless waves of energy and sword chi swept madly towards the surroundings. Disbelief appeared in Xiankong's eyes, because he hadn't imagined that his attack would actually be unable to gain the upper hand against Yang Ye's sword energy. Even though he was heavily injured right now, and his strength had dropped by a huge amount, he was still a half-saint at any rate. But Yang Yi was only at the Exalt realm. He'll definitely become a great enemy of my hallowed grounds in the future. Ghastly killing intent appeared in Xiankong's eyes. However, he didn't attack and he just turned around and intended to flee. Because a half-saint of the hallowed grounds had perished at Elder Mu's hands while all the monarch realm experts had been annihilated. But he wasn't able to escape in the end because an arc of light had obstructed his path. Xiankong exploded with rage. "Qin Bufan! I'll definitely kill you next time." He placed his palms over each other as he spoke, and then swiftly pressed them down towards the arc of light. "You don't have a next time." A voice resounded from within the arc of light, and then 2 rays of white light formed a cross that flashed forward and collided with Xiankong's attack. An enormous explosion resounded before the white light dispersed, and Xiankong was forced back by over 30 OM. Meanwhile, Yang Yi swiftly drew his sword, and then a beam of sword energy which was enhanced by the critical strike technique and 12th level sword intent flashed towards Xiankong and instantly arrived before him. The corners of Xiankong's eyes twitched a little when he sensed the terrifying energy contained within the sword energy. He didn't deal with it in a careless manner, and he disregarded the injuries he suffered from as he forcefully converged his profound energy and slapped his right palm forward. A ball of white energy flew out from his palm and smashed against Yang Ye's sword energy. Bang! The white ball of energy was blasted apart by the sword energy, and then the sword energy continued surging like a bolt of lightning towards Xiankong. Xiankong was astounded. He hadn't imagined that Yang Ye's sword energy was actually sharp and fierce to such an extent, and he didn't have the time to dodge anymore. He could only go head-on against it. Xiankong placed his palms over each other again, and then white light appeared on them as he used them to defend against Yang Ye's attack. Bang! Xiankong's body was blasted over 30 back by the sword energy, and the white light on his palm had vanished. Moreover, his hands were covered in injuries and blood. Xiankong's expression instantly turned savage when he saw the state his hands were in. After all, he was a dignified half-saint, yet he'd actually been injured by an ant at the Exalt realm? It was an extraordinary humiliation, an utter insult. The overwhelming feeling of humiliation he experienced caused Xiankong's aged face to warp to the extreme. "Die, you old dog!" Xiankong wasn't given even the slightest opportunity to catch his breath. An arc of light suddenly appeared behind him, and then a few dozen rays of white light formed a net of blades that slashed down towards Xiankong. Everywhere they passed, even space was sliced apart, causing numerous spatial rifts to cover the sky. It was an extremely horrifying sight to behold. "Fuck off!" Xianxia roared furiously as he forcefully converged his profound energy again before he slapped out a ray of white light once more. It instantly tore through space and smashed against Qin Bufan's attack. Pooh! At the same time, a few mouthfuls of blood essence sprayed from Xianxia's mouth. Bang! The entire sky in the area trembled as countless waves of energy surged madly towards the surroundings. All of these waves of energy shot forward at an extremely swift speed. So even Qin Bufan hadn't been able to avoid it and was blasted over 1 kilometer away. On the other hand, Xianxia himself was blasted almost 300 m away by the wave of energy. Xianxia's figure had just stopped in midair when a sword suddenly shot towards him from behind. Xianxia's pupils constricted to the size of needles as he turned around and slapped his palm against the tip of that sword. Bang! Yang Ye's intense sword trembled violently, while countless cracks appeared throughout it, and his figure was blasted flying by Xianxia's attack. However, he'd been able to stop his figure after flying for over 300 m, and then his sword intent surged out and instantly repaired the intense sword. Xianxia glanced at his palm, and he noticed that another mark of the sword had been left there. Xianxia took a deep breath while he glanced at the surroundings out of the corners of his eyes, and his heart sank. The Hallowed Grounds forces had 10 half-saints when he was included, and there were 11 if the Oceanic Emperor was included. However, one of those half-saints had perished at the Undertaker's hands while the Oceanic Emperor had actually fled at the critical moment. So, there were only 9 half-saints left when he was included. The Undertaker had 2 half-saints and over a dozen Monarch Realm experts on his side. Even though their overall strength was inferior to the Hallowed Grounds, the problem was that the Undertaker alone was actually keeping 7 half-saints busy. Who exactly is that Undertaker? Xianxia took a deep breath and said, "Everyone, retreat! Retreat my ass! Sky Crusher!" The arc of light appeared in front of Xianxia again, and then a strand of green flames appeared here. The space around Xianxia instantly started surging violently once the green flames appeared. "Die, you dog of the outer heavens!" A furious howl resounded from within the arc of light, and then the strand of green flames shot towards Xianxia. Xianxia's pupils constricted while shock filled his heart. If it was before, then he wouldn't feel the slightest fear towards such a technique from Qin Bufan. But he was completely exhausted now. Xianxia had no choice but to forcefully converge his profound energy again. But he'd only just started when a mouthful of blood essence sprayed out from his mouth. However, he still attempted it again, and then smashed his palms towards the green flames. Bang! The green flames transformed into threads of flames that sprayed down throughout the sky while Xianxia himself was blasted flying again. Moreover, blood essence sprayed incessantly from his mouth while his figure flew. Horizon warp! Right at this moment, Yang Ye's voice resounded once more, and then Yang Yi appeared right behind Xianxia before his intense sword pierced through Xianxia's back. Xianxia's eyes opened wide, and his eyes were filled with disbelief as he gazed at the sword that was sticking out from his chest. A moment of silence ensued before he suddenly turned around and slapped his palm against Yang Ye's chest. Yang Yi immediately spat out a mouthful of blood while his figure was slapped over 300 m away. Grand Slasher! Meanwhile, Qin Bufan's voice resounded once more, and then 2 rays of white light formed a cross that slashed down towards Xianxia. "Fuck off!" Xianxia roared furiously as he clenched his right hand into a fist, and then he smashed his fist against the white light. The white light was blasted apart, but Xianxia's right arm was sliced up into mush. Horizon warp! Qin Bufan had just been repulsed when Yang Ye's voice resounded, and then he appeared behind Xianxia again. At the same time, his intense sword flashed through Xianxia's neck. Hiss! Xianxia's head flew into the air. A half-saint had fallen. Ah! Xianming witnessed the scene of Xianxia's death, and his eyes almost split apart from rage and hatred as he roared like a madman. "Yang Yi, you and the Southern Territory have colluded with the defiant Profounders. You'll definitely suffer divine punishment. All of you definitely will. You should be thinking about yourself right now." Elder Mu slapped his palm at Xianming. Yang Yi instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Xianxia's head fly into the air. Xiankong's strength had simply exceeded his imagination. If Xiankong's cultivation hadn't been reduced to the monarch realm, and if Xiankong hadn't been heavily injured by Elder Mu, then it would be impossible for him and the mysterious man to kill Xiankong even if they attacked him madly without end. Even if a half-saint's cultivation had been suppressed to the monarch realm, it still wasn't an existence that an ordinary monarch realm expert could go against. This battle allowed Yang Yi to have a deeper understanding of how insufficient his strength was. He realized that a cultivation at the Exalt realm wasn't of any use in the chaotic times that were approaching. Regardless of whether it was the hallowed grounds or the defiant profounders, it was utterly impossible to fight them without a strength at the monarch realm or half-saint realm. Right at this moment, a translucent stone suddenly flew from Xiankong's body and shot away like a bolt of lightning. Yang Yi was slightly stunned, and then he didn't even hesitate to stop it, because he didn't need to think to know that it was definitely a precious treasure. However, he was just about to act when an arc of light flashed, and then the stone was brought into the arc of light. Ha ha! The stone of suppression. It's actually the stone of suppression. That old dog finally did something good. Ha ha ha! Qin Bufan's overjoyed and roaring laughter resounded from within the arc of light. Suddenly, the violet mink appeared on Yang Ye's shoulder, and then a ray of violet light flashed. After that, the translucent stone appeared between the violet mink's claws. Yang Yi was stunned. The violet mink rubbed it for a moment and seemed to feel like it wasn't fun at all. So, she slapped it with her claw and passed it over to Yang Yi. My stone of suppression. Qin Bufan's furious voice resounded. And then Yang Yi sensed an aura lock onto him and the violet mink. Yang Ye's heart shook. He hurriedly placed the translucent stone within the primordial pagoda before he sheathed his intense sword, and then he gazed vigilantly at the arc of light. Give it back to me. Qin Bufan's voice resounded from within the arc of light, and it was slightly cold. The violet mink hurriedly shook her little head. Since you refuse, then I'll take it myself. As soon as he finished speaking, the arc of light shot towards Yang Yi. It's mine once it falls into my hands. You want to take it from me? You must be dreaming. Yang Ye's intense sword suddenly started trembling violently, and then a sword howl resounded through the heavens and the earth before a beam of violet sword energy surged forward. Based on what that expert from the hallowed grounds said just now, Yang Yi knew that the man hidden in the arc of light was a defiant profounder of legend. He was rather surprised by this because he hadn't expected that they'd actually emerged from the seal and arrived at Profounder Continent. At the same time, he witnessed how terrifying they were. The defiant profounder before him was only at the monarch realm, but he'd been able to heavily injure Xiankong with ease. As for those ordinary monarch realm experts, they were actually only able to resist a few moves from him at most. He's strong. Very strong. But so what? In any case, it's in my possession, so I absolutely refuse to hand it over. The violet sword Qi and Qin Bufan's arc of light smashed against each other. And then a moment of silence ensued before both of them exploded in midair. The formidable waves of energy emanated from the point of collision caused both of them to be blasted over 1 kilometer away before they were able to avoid being struck by the aftershock. Eh! An exclaim resounded from within the arc of light. A mere Exalt realm profounder actually possesses such strength. That's quite surprising. Out of consideration for the fact that we joined forces against that old dog just now, hand over the stone of suppression and I'll let bygones be bygones. Otherwise, you'll die. Yang Yi stretched out his hand and made a grasping motion. An intense sword instantly condensed in his grasp. At the same time, over a dozen extreme-grade energy stones appeared in his pockets before ceaselessly emanating energy which surged into him. I'll take the fact that we joined forces just now into consideration as well. So you can leave and I won't stop you. Otherwise, you'll die. I can't be killed. A voice resounded from within the arc of light. But your strength will definitely plummet with every death you experience. Right? Said Yang Yi. He wasn't confident in his ability to kill Qin Bufan because while Qin Bufan was at the monarch realm, he was probably a half-saint in the past. However, Yang Yi was only at the Exalt realm. No further words resounded from within the arc of light, and it was just fluctuating without end. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly while the last remaining profound energy within him surged madly as he gazed vigilantly at the arc of light. Bang! Right at this moment, rumblings suddenly resounded from afar. Yang Yi was delighted when he looked over because another half-saint from the hallowed grounds had fallen. Leave! Everyone leave! Xian Ming's anxious voice resounded. The remaining half-saints didn't dare stay any longer when they heard him, and they transformed into rays of light that shot towards the distance. The demon saint was about to pursue when Elder Mu waved his hand and said, "Don't pursue them." The demon saint and the others were slightly stunned. And then they nodded. Even though the Southern Territory had killed a few half-saints, it had suffered heavy losses as well. Those that survived were heavily injured, and that even included Elder Mu. So even if they could kill those half-saints by pursuing them now, they would definitely suffer heavy losses. "Are you sure that you don't want to leave?" Yang Yi gazed at the arc of light as he spoke in a low voice. "Just you wait. Not just anyone can steal from me." "Qin Bufan." A voice resounded from within the arc of light, and then an absorbing force suddenly surged out from within it. All the corpses of the half-saints and monarch realm experts in the sky instantly transformed into rays of light that entered the arc of light before it flickered a few times and vanished in the horizon. Yang Ye's profound energy slowed down to a stop when he saw Qin Bufan leave, and his expression was very solemn as he gazed in the direction that it had vanished towards. Because the defiant profounders were much more terrifying than the hallowed grounds. There were over 10,000 defiant profounders being sealed within the hallowed grounds, and if all of them were to escape the seal, then not to mention the hallowed grounds, even the joint forces of the entire continent and the hallowed grounds would probably be unable to resist them. The defiant profounders might be his enemies yet might not. However, he had no choice but to consider the worst-case scenario. That was a defiant profounder? The demon saint gazed at the direction that the arc of light had vanished towards as he asked this question in a heavy voice. Moreover, there was a serious expression in his eyes. "He should be one," said Elder Mu. "He's very strong," said the demon saint. Elder Mu suddenly stated, "He isn't the strongest." The demon saint, Yang Yi, and the others revealed solemn expressions in response to this. The demon saint said, "There are even stronger defiant profounders?" Elder Mu nodded and said, "I've never been to the hallowed grounds, but I possess some knowledge about the defiant profounders. According to rumor, some of them possess all sorts of inconceivable techniques. Just like that defiant profounder from before. Every single one of the techniques he executed were above the Dao rank at least. In short, this world is growing more and more chaotic. Elder Mu, are you all right?" Yang Ye's voice was filled with worry as he gazed at the state of Elder Mu's chest. At the same time, he felt quite guilty. After all, Elder Mu wasn't related to all of this at all, but Elder Mu had been swept into it because of him. The old man who stood before him had done too much for him, but he wasn't able to do anything for Elder Mu. The primordial violet energy within him could help Elder Mu attain the Saint Realm. But the problem was that the primordial violet energy he possessed was utterly insufficient. Moreover, once he exposed the fact that he possessed it, it wouldn't be just the experts of the continent who would go mad with desire, even the hallowed grounds and defiant profounders would go mad. At that time, he would truly have no chance at survival. So, he was utterly unable and dared not expose the primordial violet energy within the primordial pagoda until he possessed absolute strength. Elder Mu glanced at his chest before he shook his head. "It isn't life-threatening." He gazed at Yang Yi and continued, "The monarch realm experts of our southern territory have either died or suffered injuries. Besides a few people, everyone else isn't able to fight again in the near future. On the other hand, the demon saint, demon emperor, and I have to enter into closed-door cultivation to recuperate. So, you'll have to rely on yourself to deal with most things." Yang Yi nodded and said, "Seniors recuperate well. Just leave everything else to me. I'll unify the entire continent as soon as possible." Elder Mu nodded and said, "You have the stone of suppression, so you should be able to protect your life even if you encounter a half-saint. However, you can't be careless, especially when you're up against the defiant profounders. As for the hallowed grounds, They would absolutely not dare to dispatch any more half-saints to the profounder continent now that they've lost possession of that stone. Of course, it would be a completely different story if they're willing to sacrifice half-saints to destroy the seal between the hallowed grounds and profounder continent. Elder Mu's figure flashed and vanished on the spot once he finished speaking. "Take good care of Zier," said the demon emperor before he vanished with the demon saint. At the same time, the founding emperor, beast emperor Xiao Tianji, and the others vanished as well. Yang Yi took a deep breath, and then he looked towards the direction of the exalted Han Empire and the devil race because he felt that it was time for them to vanish from the continent. Even though the devil saint had changed sides and attacked the hallowed grounds just now, it still wasn't sufficient to make him spare the devil race or oceanic clans, and Nanjing had almost died. And even slaughtering both the devil race and oceanic clans wouldn't be sufficient to vent the hatred in his heart. "She's dead." Suddenly, a woman appeared behind Yang Yi. Yang Yi turned around and was slightly stunned because it was Enbiru, the black-clothed woman, the assassin sovereign, who usually stayed by Enbiru's side, had perished. She'd attempted to assassinate a half-saint during the battle yet was noticed, and then that half-saint obliterated her on the spot. She didn't even leave a corpse behind. Besides the black-clothed woman, many other Monarch Realm experts had perished. There were some that Yang Yi knew and some that he didn't. In short, the Southern Territory had won, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. Yang Yi had a bad impression of the black-clothed woman. After all, she tried to kill him on more than one occasion. So, he'd said that the first person he killed when he attained the Monarch Realm would be her. However, Yang Yi felt quite sad when he heard of her death now. Because she died for the Southern Territory no matter what. Yang Yi suddenly realized that it was truly not easy for one to survive during such chaotic times. Yang Yi restrained his thoughts, and then he gazed at Enbiru. Her face was covered in sorrow and she even seemed to have been crying. So it was obvious to him how much pain she'd suffered from the death of the black-clothed woman. "I'm sorry." Yang Yi felt that he had to apologize. In the end, it was he who made the hallowed grounds attack the Southern Territory, so he had to take responsibility for their deaths. And Enbiru shook her head and said, "My clan avoided destruction by siding with you, so it naturally has to pay a price. It isn't just my own clan, there are many other clans and sects that aren't just fighting for you, they are fighting for themselves as well. So, you don't have to feel responsible at all." Yang Yi suddenly asked, "Did those assassins from the clan really have nothing to do with you?" And Enbiru raised her head and gazed at him in silence. Yang Yi said, "I'm sorry, but I've been constantly conflicted because of it. Because I'm unable to accept someone who tried to harm me in the past." She replied, "Would you believe me if I said that I didn't?" "I would." Yang Yi nodded. Her eyes flickered slightly. "Why?" He answered, "Actually, I believed it from a very long time ago, but you never gave me an explanation." She exclaimed, "You never gave me the chance." Yang Yi said, "You were allies with my greatest enemy. How would I give you a chance? I'm not a magnanimous person, so I really did treat you as an enemy when you formed an alliance with Luo Jun. He was a loyal person, but the precondition was that others were loyal to him. Otherwise, he was a merciless person instead." And Enbiru fell silent because she had nothing to say. At that time, she hadn't expected that Yang Yi would become enemies with Luo Jun, and coupled with the powerful forces that Luo Jun possessed at the time, forming an alliance with him really could provide a huge amount of benefits to her clan. So, she'd led her clan to form an alliance with Luo Jun. But she hadn't imagined that this decision would make her Yang Ye's enemy. It could only be explained as the will of the heavens playing tricks on her. Yang Yi said, "Manage the Southern Territory's affairs with Ding Xiaoyao from now on. All right?" And Enbiru was definitely a capable person, but it wasn't his idea to exclude her from any positions that held authority. The main reason was that Ding Xiaoyao was clearly aware of the unresolved problem that existed between him and Enbiru, and that was why she'd excluded Enbiru from any authority. However, Enbiru shook her head and said, "My aunt was my only relative. Now that she's dead, I've realized that the fate of the clan isn't really important to me. If it's possible, I would rather exchange the entire clan for her life. I'm tired." and I don't want to worry about anything else anymore. I came to look for you because I wanted to tell you that I'm leaving. I won't take the Inclan's forces with me, so I hope that you'll treat them well. Can't you stay? Xianxia stared her in the eye as he spoke. Do you want me to stay? She stared him in the eye as well and replied with a question. Xianxia was slightly stunned, and he hesitated for an instant. However, it was exactly that instant of hesitation that caused a trace of disappointment to flash through her eyes, and then she turned around and walked away. However, Unbiru stopped moving a moment later because Xianxia had appeared in front of her, and he said, I hope that you stay. After experiencing so many things, Xianxia understood that he really couldn't just let go, because once he did, then it might be eternal. Moreover, how could rest at ease knowing Unbiru was all alone during such chaotic times? Unbiru gazed at him for a short while before she said, Then I'll stay. Just like that, she became Xianxia's right hand just like Ding Xiaoyao, and the responsibility Ding Xiaoyao shouldered reduced greatly because of it. Both of them were extremely intelligent women, so when they both worked together, everything within the Southern Territory was managed in an orderly fashion. Xianxia didn't have to worry at all. After he finished arranging everything for Unbiru, he was about to enter the primordial pagoda to check on Nanjing. However, Xianxia had suddenly arrived at ancient domain city, and Shu Xian from the Treant clan which had left previously was with her. At the main hall of the city governor's estate. Husband, it has been so long. I've really missed you. Xianxia immediately smiled sweetly and walked over towards him. Her eyes were filled with tender affection, and it was like Xianxia really was her husband, whom she hadn't met for many years. However, she'd only just arrived within a meter of him when a strand of sword intent pushed her back by over 10 steps. A wisp of surprise flashed through her eyes, but it wasn't long before she recovered her composure, and she revealed sorrow instead. Husband, what are you doing? Why treat me like this? I've even been so worried about you all this time. Xianxia was very beautiful, coupled with the sweet and gentle voice she used, and the extremely charming expression she revealed. She could be said to be extremely alluring. But Xianxia remained unfazed. He had a slightly favorable impression of her in the past, but she'd completely disregarded the situation of the Southern Territory throughout this period of time. Moreover, she'd immediately arrived once the hallowed grounds had been pushed back. He truly detested such actions. If it wasn't for the fact that she'd once lent him her gold guards during the battle outside the Saint Ruins, he couldn't even be bothered to meet her. Miss Yin, please get to the point. Unbiru spoke flatly. Ding Xiaoyao was still in the Central Territory as she was leading the charge against the exalted Han Empire. So, Unbiru was in charge of the affairs within the city and the Southern Territory. For now, Ding Xiaoyao managed the external affairs while she managed the internal affairs. Xianxia glanced at Unbiru. She was a smart woman and knew that this woman from the clan held hostility towards her. As for the reason, it was obviously because of Xianxia. Xianxia withdrew her smile and revealed a calm expression as she said, Young Master Yang, I came here on behalf of the Northern Territory. We want to. Xianxia waved his hand and said, I don't want to deal with that. Ding Xiaoyao has the final say. If you want to discuss it, then discuss it with her. Xianxia replied, I came specially to talk to you because we weren't able to come to an agreement with Miss Ding. Xianxia asked, What do you mean? She laughed bitterly and replied, Because Miss Ding wants our Northern Territory to surrender unconditionally. Otherwise, she'll lead the army to the north once she's done with the exalted Han Empire. You don't want to yield? Asked Xianxia. Xianxia pondered deeply for a moment before she said, The Northern Territory is the fruit of the painstaking efforts of the Grand Preceptor and countless others from my Shang dynasty. Even if I agree to give it away with such ease, the Grand Preceptor and those subordinates of mine wouldn't allow it. They won't. Xianxia laughed coldly and said, Then I'll destroy it all. Xianxia's expression changed, and she said, Could it be that you really refuse to give me any leeway out of consideration for everything that has happened in the past? Xianxia said, I wouldn't have even met you today if I didn't. The continent must be united. If the Northern Territory refuses to yield, then only death will await all of you. Xianxia gazed at Yang Yi for a short while, before she suddenly cracked a smile and said, I heard that a Nanjing was heavily injured? Yang Ye's intense sword suddenly swept forward and instantly arrived at Xianxia's fair white forehead. Moreover, it had pierced her skin and caused a drop of blood to drop slowly down Yang Ye's sword. Are you happy? Yang Ye's voice was icy cold, and the killing intent in his eyes was almost material. All the others here were stunned when Yang Yi suddenly attacked, and it was especially so for Xianxia. She'd been terrified to the point of taking a few steps back. On the other hand, Xianxia's face had turned slightly pale while her eyes were filled with disbelief. She hadn't expected that Yang Yi would actually attack her, and it would actually be so ruthless and merciless. Xianxia's temper flared up as well, and she stared coldly at Yang Yi and said, Nanjing's meridians and bones were completely shattered, so only the life water of the Greenwood clan is able to heal her quickly. I came here today to negotiate with you. Let the Northern Territory remain free and I'll give it to you. Life water. Yang Ye's pupils constricted, and then he suddenly turned to look at Xianxia. Xianxia's body trembled, and she couldn't help but take a few steps back. She felt that Yang Yi was truly too terrifying when he was angry. Where is it? Yang Yi stared her in the eyes, and his icy cold gaze carried a trace of urgency. She won't give it to you. Xianxia's voice had turned cold. You can dream of obtaining it if you don't agree to my conditions. Let me see if the Northern Territory or Nanjing is more important to you. And Bairu shook her head. She knew Yang Ye's character well, and he was absolutely one who responded very badly to threats. So Xianxia was clearly courting death by threatening him. Yang Yi glanced coldly at Xianxia, and then he withdrew his intense sword before he gazed at Xianxia. He said, I need the life water. Hand it over and I'll let both of you leave safely. Xianxia was quite afraid of Yang Yi. She gazed at Xianxia as if she was asking for her opinion. Xianxia grunted coldly and said, Yang Yi, I told you just now, you can have the life water, but you must agree to my conditions first. I'll hand it over immediately if you do. Otherwise, you can dream of obtaining it even if you kill us. Yang Yi took a deep breath and said, I'll give you one last chance. Will you hand it over or not? No. Xianxia refused to give in. Yang Yi nodded, and then he started walking towards the exit. Where are you going? Asked Bairu. To slaughter the royal family of the Northern Territory and the Treant clan. Yang Yi, don't you dare. Xianxia roared furiously. Yang Yi stopped moving and said, Miss Yin, I'll give you one last chance out of consideration for the relationship we had in the past. Otherwise, I'll do as I've said. Not to mention slaughtering the royal family of the Northern Territory and the Treant clan. He would even attack the hallowed grounds without the slightest hesitation for a Nanjing. Xianxia's face had turned ghastly pale while terror filled her eyes. She might be doubtful if it was anyone else who spoke these words, but she absolutely believed it when it was Yang Yi. After all, if this man before her was enraged, then he would be a complete and utter god of death. She hurriedly spoke before Xianxia could speak. Young Master Yang, my Treant clan is willing to give you the life water. Xianxia stared fixedly at Yang Yi while her peerlessly beautiful face seemed slightly savage from the rage she experienced. Yang Yi nodded and said, Thank you. Xianxia heaved a sigh of relief, and then she formed a seal with both hands before a ray of green light surged out from within her. After that, a dark green drop of liquid appeared before Yang Yi. The dark green drop of liquid had vanished as soon as it appeared, and Yang Yi vanished as well. Xianxia was still angry, but Xianxia had heaved a huge sigh of relief, because she felt that Yang Yi was really quite terrifying when he was angry. Of course, she was clearly aware why Yang Yi treated them like that. Yang Ye's attitude towards both of them was very good in the past, and the reason he'd acted so mercilessly was probably because her Treat clan had abandoned the Southern Territory in the face of danger. Xianxia knew that the Treant clan's decision was wrong. Not only was the Treant clan's decision wrong, Xianxia and the Northern Territory made the wrong decision as well. The Northern Territory shouldn't have stood by idly and watched the battle when the Southern Territory faced the hallowed grounds. Now that the hallowed grounds had been repulsed, the Northern Territory had immediately come over to conduct negotiations instead. So, not to mention Yang Yi, even she would feel quite displeased by that. "Missine, are you going to stay or leave right now?" And Bairu took up a teacup from the table and took a light sip before she spoke flatly. Xianxia forced herself to calm down, and then she gazed at Bairu and said, "Madam and should I call you Madam N or Madam Yang now?" And Bairu's hand stiffened slightly, and then she grinned and said, "Missine, your tone is really quite sour." Xianxia laughed coldly yet didn't speak. And Bairu said, "Missine, you're a smart person, and it's obvious from how you approached Yang Yi and tried to draw him over to your side. Unfortunately, both of us lack Ding Xiaoyao's courage. She dared to bet her entire clan on Yang Yi, and she was able to never abandon him no matter the danger they faced. So, she'd one of the people Yang Yi trusts the most, and she's the one with authority in the Southern Territory that's only second to Yang Yi. She deserves that." When she spoke up to this point, and Bairu paused for a moment and continued, "But what about you, Missine? You helped Yang Yi, but did he not help you as well? Moreover, the Northern Territory did send people to contact us in the past, but what about after that?" The Northern Territory stopped mentioning anything about an alliance once the hallowed grounds and exalted Han Empire launched large-scale attacks against the Southern Territory. "No one is stupid, don't you think?" Xianxia's expression was quite unsightly. She'd suggested that the Northern Territory should dispatch experts to assist Yang Yi. However, the seniors of the Northern Territory rejected her suggestion because they felt that it was best to allow the Southern Territory, hallowed grounds, and exalted Han Empire to exhaust each other's strength. Moreover, the entire Northern Territory felt that the Southern Territory had no chance at victory. So, dispatching forces to assist it would be no different than sending those forces to their deaths. Actually, it wasn't just the other members of the Northern Territory, even she felt that the Southern Territory had no chance at victory. Because the forces of the hallowed grounds and exalted Han Empire were truly too numerous, and they were extremely terrifying. But no one had expected that the half-saint of the Southern Territory would actually be so formidable to the point of even successively slaughtering a few half-saints from the hallowed grounds. Xianxia knew that the Northern Territory had made a wrong decision. She'd actually come here today to make amends. However, she'd underestimated Yang Ye's feelings for a Nanjing. In his heart, that woman called a Nanjing was far more important to her, or it could be said that she couldn't be compared with a Nanjing at all. And Bairu said, "Missine, you made a huge mistake this time, and it was using a Nanjing to threaten Yang Yi. You should have been very clearly aware that he's one who doesn't respond well to threats, so threatening him would only make him become hostile and fight back. If I were you, I wouldn't have spoken about forming an alliance, and I would have said that I'd come specially to give a Nanjing the life water. I presume the outcome would have been very different if you did that." Xianxia laughed bitterly and said, "Is there no way to turn the situation around?" The Northern Territory was the fruit of the painstaking effort of her, the Grand Preceptor, and countless loyal members of the Shang dynasty. Not to mention that the Grand Preceptor and the others wouldn't be willing to give it up just like that, even she wouldn't. And Bairu stood up and said, "Missine, you've been blinded from being too involved with it all. Take a proper look at the situation. The demon race has formed an alliance with our Southern Territory, and it won't take long for the exalted Han Empire to be defeated. At that time, the entire human race would almost be completely unified, so would anyone throughout the continent still be a match for our forces? Not to mention the Northern Territory. Even the Devil race and Oceanic clans would only face death if they refused to yield." Xianxia was shocked. "Yang Yi intends to unify the continent?" And Bairu answered, "The defiant Profounders are about to emerge from the seal, and I'm sure you're aware of how strong they are. Besides the defiant Profounders, there's the hallowed grounds as well. The only way our continent can protect itself is by joining forces. You should be very well aware of Yang Ye's character. He would absolutely not allow any force on the continent to have a chance at stabbing him in the back. So all the clans and forces on the continent that aren't our friends are our enemies." As she spoke and Bairu had walked to the door, she knew very well what decision Xianxia had to make. No, it should be said that Xianxia and the entire Northern Territory didn't have a choice at all. At this moment, Yangyi and the Southern Territory possessed absolute strength. Xianxia, what should we do? Asked Shu Exan. She hadn't expected that not only had she lost a drop of life water during this trip to the Southern Territory, the problem they came to solve hadn't been resolved as well. She truly felt like they'd suffered a huge loss during this trip. Xianxia fell silent for a short while, and then she said, "We're going back to the Northern Territory." She walked out of the room while she spoke those words. Within the primordial pagoda, and Nanjing was lying on a bed in one of the rooms here. Even though she was no different than a cripple now, there was no gloominess on her face, and there was only calmness there. It wasn't long before Yang Yi arrived in this room. After he arrived here, Xiao Yushi and Su Qingshi, who were taking care of Nanjing, exchanged glances before leaving the room. Nanjing said, "You're here." Yang Yi was both terrified and felt fortunate as he gazed at Nanjing, who laid there on the bed. He was terrified because if he was just a little bit later, then Nanjing would become the second piece of unforgettable pain in his life. He felt fortunate because while Nanjing was in a bad state, he still had the chance to make amends. She hadn't felt very important to him before all of this happened, but when he saw her hurt like that, he finally realized exactly how much she meant to him. People were like that. They never cherished things that they had, and only when they lost those things would they realize how important it was. Some had the chance to cherish it once more, but most suffered an eternal loss without any chance of starting all over again. Yang Yi walked over to her side as he waved his right hand lightly, and then the dark green drop of life water instantly appeared before her. He said gently, "This is life water, and it's able to immediately recover any injuries." Yang Yi sent the life water to her mouth while he spoke, and Nanjing didn't drink it. She gazed at him instead and said, "Your body is in a very bad state right now." Yang Yi nodded and said, "I know, but it's fine. I've temporarily suppressed the issues within me." And Nanjing suddenly said, "Promise me something." Yang Yi was stunned, and then he immediately nodded. "Tell me what it is. I know that you really hate the Devil race and Oceanic clans because of what happened, and you might have even decided to annihilate them, right?" said Nanjing. Yang Yi nodded. He really had aroused the intention to annihilate them, because if it wasn't for them and the hallowed grounds, then Nanjing wouldn't have fallen into such a state. She continued, "Spare them if they surrender." Yang Yi pondered deeply for a moment, and then he nodded. "All right," she asked. "Aren't you going to ask why I'm asking you to spare them?" Yang Yi replied, "I can annihilate them for you, and I can spare them for you as well." And Nanjing gazed at Yang Yi for a short while before she said, "Slaughter is never good. Regardless of whether it's the heaven Tao of our world or the world beyond, I presume it wouldn't accept one who has killed too much. Moreover, we need support now and not corpses. Don't do things that aren't beneficial for us just because of some resentment you feel." Yang Yi didn't refute her and just nodded. He sent the life water to her again and said, "If you ask me not to, then I won't. Let's not pay attention to everything else for now. Just recuperate for now." As she gazed at the tender affection and concern in Yang Ye's eyes, and Nanjing's lips moved a little, yet she was at a loss for words. Her red lips parted slightly, and then Yang Yi flicked his finger, causing the drop of life water to instantly enter her mouth. After it entered her body, it swiftly transformed into countless strands of green energy that flowed through her meridians, and it ceaselessly repaired the shattered bones and meridians within her. In next to no time, her meridians and bones started to recover. Yang Yi heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that it was effective, and he sat by her bed and watched over her for a while before he left the primordial pagoda. Yang Yi had just left when Nanjing suddenly opened her eyes, and she was slightly dazed as she gazed at where Yang Yi was sitting just now. In his room, Yang Yi gazed at the translucent stone before him as he said to himself, "The stone of suppression?" Elder Mu and the others had their cultivations forcefully suppressed to the monarch realm by this stone. It's truly unimaginable that it was even able to suppress half-saints. Fortunately, it has fallen into my hands. It would truly be a huge problem if it fell into the hands of that defiant profounder, Qin Bufan. The reason that the experts of the hallowed grounds dared to leave it and come to the continent was because this stone could suppress the half-saints of the continent. But now that it has fallen into my hands, I think they wouldn't dare rashly send anyone to the continent anymore. So, the important matter at hand is to first deal with the injuries I've suffered, and then unify the continent as soon as possible. Lastly, I have to travel to the hallowed grounds to take the sword precursor. Yang Yi was very clearly aware that the seal in the hallowed grounds was definitely unable to suppress the defiant profounders any longer. Once they fully emerged from the seal, then he wouldn't just lose the sword precursor, the sword spirit within the ancient sheath might die as well. At that time, it would be equivalent to losing Heavenrend. So, even if he didn't do it for the sword spirit's sake, he still had to seize the sword precursor for himself. If it was in the past, he would naturally not dare to head to the hallowed grounds before attaining the monarch realm. But he had the stone of suppression now. Even though it was still dangerous, it wouldn't be as dangerous as being completely helpless before a half-saint. Even if he encountered a half-saint, he felt that he should be able to flee from them with the help of the stone of suppression. Of course, he had to resolve everything on the continent before he traveled to the hallowed grounds. Yang Yi put the stone of suppression away, and then he sat cross-legged on the bed and closed his eyes as he started to recuperate. The biggest problem within him was the conflict between the dragon ancestor's blood essence and his own blood essence. In the end, the dragon ancestor's blood essence contained terrifying energy that he hadn't been able to fully absorb. After all, he was too weak when he received it, and the only reason he'd been able to absorb a portion of it was that his meridians and blood had been tempered by the primordial violet energy. He'd intended to absorb the energy within the dragon ancestor's blood essence and the blood essence of the three divine beasts during his charge into the monarch realm. But he had no choice but to stop because Nanjing was in danger, so he suffered backlash from them all. Fortunately, it wasn't a very severe situation for him. After all, while he wasn't at the monarch realm, his body and internal organs weren't inferior to monarch realm experts. So, Yang Yi ceaselessly utilized his violet profound energy to repair the bones and meridians within him, and he used the opportunity to gradually absorb the remaining blood essence of the dragon ancestor and the three divine beasts. Outside ancient Domain City, at a dense forest which was a few hundred kilometers away from ancient Domain City, a mysterious figure wearing a white robe and white cloak was standing atop a tree. Moreover, faint light was flickering around him. The white-robed figure was none other than Qin Bufan. "You've been following me for quite some time now. Show yourself." Qin Bufan placed his hands behind his back while his voice resounded from beneath the cloak. What a strong divine sense! A middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of Qin Bufan. Yang Yi would definitely be astounded if he was here because it was the city governor of ancient Domain City, Lu Yuanhao. The faint light around Qin Bufan suddenly started to flicker swiftly when he saw Lu Yuanhao, and his puzzled and slightly shocked voice resounded from beneath the cloak. "I sense an aura which isn't from this world coming from you. You aren't a profounder of this world. Who exactly are you?" "Outer heavens. The endless devil sect." A trace of black-colored energy suddenly erupted from him once he finished speaking, and then the trees in an area of 500 meters instantly withered and transformed into puddles of black water. Suddenly, the flickering light on Qin Bufan suddenly left him and shot forward like a bolt of lightning. It instantly arrived before Lu Yuanhao, but a strand of black energy immediately smashed against the light, and an explosion resounded before both of them dispersed in the air. If it wasn't for the endless devil sect and sky divine hall, then how could I have been sealed in such a tiny place for 100,000 years? Qin Bufan's voice contained boundless killing intent, and the space around him trembled violently without end. It was an extremely shocking sight. Lu Yuanhao didn't show the slightest fear, and he spoke flatly. "All those years ago, all of you immediately started to seize the quintessence violet energy of the outer heavens upon arriving there from far away in space. Tell me, how could anyone tolerate all of you?" The space around Qin Bufan gradually calmed down, and he spoke after a short while passed. "The winner is always right. No matter what, we lost all those years ago. Since we did, then we deserve to be sealed. All those years ago, Your sects extracted the quintessence violet energy of this world to seal all of us and set up the heaven path as the gate of this prison. I'm really curious. As someone from the outer heavens, what are you doing on profounder continent? You don't need to know why. Lu Yuanhao spoke flatly. All you need to know is that I've come to help all of you. Help us? Ha-ha? Qin Bufan roared with laughter, and he only stopped after quite some time passed and said, How laughable! Help us? If I'm not wrong, then the members of your endless devil sect are one of the forces guarding the heaven path, right? Lu Yuanhao said, Even if all of you charge out of the seal, do you think that your forces would be sufficient to go against the hallowed grounds? If it was in the past, then the current strength of the hallowed grounds would definitely be insufficient before all of you. But all of you've been sealed for 100,000 years, and your strengths have declined greatly. So, can all of you go against the hallowed grounds? Even if all of you destroy the hallowed grounds, how many of you would be left? Would all of you be able to get through the heaven path? Qin Bufan fell silent. Lu Yuanhao continued, Actually, not to mention the heaven path, all of you might not even be able to defeat the hallowed grounds. All of you were conceited, refused to acknowledge each other's strength, and only knew how to fight on your own when you encounter enemies. If all of you had joined forces all those years ago, then even the joint forces of my endless devil sect and the Sky Divine Hall might not have been able to seal all of you. What exactly are you trying to say? Qin Bufan spoke in a low voice. Lu Yuanhao replied, I want to make a deal with all of you. I'll help all of you escape this prison. But all of you have to help my endless devil sect destroy Sky Divine Hall. Qin Bufan spoke coldly. You want to use us? Lu Yuanhao answered, We're just using each other. If you don't agree, then I'll continue waiting. In any case, there'll be more defiant profounders. I believe that there'll definitely be some who are willing to work with me. Qin Bufan fell silent for a short while before he said, Then continue waiting. Lu Yuanhao's eyes narrowed as he said, You refuse? Do you know that it'll be utterly impossible for you to overcome the heaven path without the help of my endless devil sect? Even though I've been sealed for 100,000 years, I've gained some knowledge of this world after I escaped. Since that fellow, the unfettered one, was able to succeed all those years ago, then why can't I? Qin Bufan's figure suddenly flickered and vanished on the spot once he finished speaking. Lu Yuanhao was slightly stunned, but it wasn't long before his expression changed. He was just about to leave, but it was too late because an old man had appeared in front of him. The Undertaker! Lu Yuanhao gazed at the old man with a solemn expression as he spoke in a deep voice. You really aren't from here. Elder Mu gazed at Lu Yuanhao while his eyes revealed a trace of seriousness and bewilderment. Lu Yuanhao looked at Elder Mu with an extremely heavy and fearful gaze. Even though this old man's strength wasn't as formidable as the unfettered one, Elder Mu was definitely the strongest on the continent after the unfettered one. The most important thing was the old man's identity. Lu Yuanhao replied in a low voice, Am, but aren't you? Elder Mu's eyes narrowed slightly as he said, I'm not from here as well? You don't know? A wisp of surprise flashed through Lu Yuanhao's eyes, but it wasn't long before he seemed to have thought of something and nodded slightly. He said, Right. How could someone who was banished be allowed to possess his complete memories? Explain. Elder Mu spoke in a low voice. Lu Yuanhao shook his head and said, If you're able to break through from the half-saint realm and attain the saint realm, then you'll naturally be able to unlock the seal in your mind. At that time, you'll understand everything. If you're unable to attain the saint realm, then knowing your own origins is completely meaningless, isn't it? No wonder I wasn't able to recall anything after I woke up at the bottom of Death Abyss. So there's a seal in my mind. I never expected that I'm actually from the world outside. Ha-ha! A wisp of ferocity flashed through his eyes. After all, no one would be happy to have lived an ignorant life for over 10,000 years. Actually, if you tried to overcome the heaven path before the Sword Sect's founding ancestor, then you should have been able to leave this world a long time ago. Lu Yuanhao said, Unfortunately, you missed that opportunity. The Sword Sect's founding ancestor's success caused the outer heavens to dare not underestimate profounder continent again. So, those tasked with guarding the heaven path were changed to Saint Realm experts. That's why no one after the Sword Sect's founding ancestor has been able to overcome it. Because even a half-saint is like an ant before a saint. Elder Mu raised his head slowly and looked up into the sky. What exactly are they trying to do? Seal and suppress the defiant profounders. Lu Yuanhao explained, it's impossible for you to imagine their true strength. They're able to instantly attain the Saint Realm if they are able to obtain primordial violet energy. All those years ago, they arrived as a group of over 10,000 Saint Realm experts. If all the powers of the outer heavens hadn't joined forces and coupled with the chaotic relationship between the defiant profounders themselves, they would have probably dominated this entire region in space. 1 billion living beings here have to be sacrificed for that? Asked Elder Mu. If 1 billion weren't sacrificed here, 1 trillion might have died instead. Lu Yuanhao said. Yang Yi said that cultivation itself is defiance of the heavens, and that's true. Actually, it isn't just a fight with the heavens, it's a fight with other people and all sorts of beings. Elder Mu nodded and said, Yang Yi was right. There's no right and wrong in this world, and there's only a differentiation between strong and weak. We're weak, so we can only be sealed and suppressed by others, and we can't blame anyone for it. The only one we can blame is ourselves for being too weak. The weak have no rights. Lu Yuanhao spoke in a heavy tone. Elder Mu chuckled, and then he gazed at Lu Yuanhao and said, Be frank, are we enemies? Lu Yuanhao's heart shook. He knew that the old man who stood before him had aroused killing intent. His current strength was absolutely sufficient for him to flee, but he was definitely incapable of defeating the Undertaker. However, fleeing would spoil his plan. So, he pondered deeply for a moment before he said, My plans don't conflict with yours. That's why I chose Yang Yi and not Luo Jun. Elder Mu took a deep and long glance at Lu Yuanhao before he said, I'll be keeping an eye on you. He vanished on the spot once he finished speaking. Lu Yuanhao stood silently on the spot for some time before he left as well. 3 young girls were seated on the stone steps outside Yang Ye's room. It was Bauer, Little Yao, and Lei Lin who was constantly eating spirit fruits. The violet mink was on Lei Lin's shoulder. Little Yao, you've been constantly cultivating lately and never play with me anymore. Bauer puckered her little lips. Little Yao had started to only cultivate every single day and never accompanied her anymore, and that made her feel very displeased. Yang Yao was still very young, but she was a 9th-rank King Realm profounder now. Actually, she could be considered a rare genius in the Southern Territory. Of course, besides the natural talent she possessed, it was also because she could obtain any resources she desired. Moreover, there were countless Exalt Realm and Monarch Realm experts to provide her with guidance at all times. So, her cultivation naturally advanced by leaps and bounds. At this moment, she'd shed quite a bit of immaturity and seemed much more mature. She replied, Bauer, we can't be playing all the time. We have to become stronger and help Big Brother. Otherwise, it'll be too tiring for Big Brother to deal with everything on his own. The violet mink hurriedly nodded, and Lei Lin immediately nodded as well when she saw that. But cultivating isn't fun at all. Bauer had a bitter expression on her face because cultivating was truly painful to her. Lei Lin seemed to agree with Bauer, and she hurriedly nodded without the violet mink telling her to. However, the violet mink slapped her a few times on the head in response. Yang Yao sighed while acting like she was much older, and she patted Bauer on the shoulder and said, Big Sister Bauer, you've always been protecting me in the past. So Big Brother, and I will protect you once I've become strong. So long as Big Brother and I are here, then you can blast anyone you want, all right? Bauer's eyes lit up as she said, Very good. The violet mink rolled her eyes at Bauer. Xiao Yushi and Su Qingshi exchanged glances as they watched from afar, and they smiled. Su Qingshi said, Actually, wouldn't it be great if we're able to live peacefully like this forever? Xiao Yushi shook her head and said, Forget such thoughts. Not to mention the state of our life, even our lives won't belong to us without absolute strength. Su Qingshi nodded and said, Aren't we a little too useless? And Nanjing can help him. Ding Xiaoyao can as well, but we can only be protected. We have to work hard, said Xiao Yushi. Su Qingsha replied, it's impossible to catch up to him regardless of how hard we try. However, we still can't give up. He wasn't even a match for me in the past. Su Qingsha blushed a little when she recalled everything that happened between her and Yang Yi at the bottom of Death Abyss. At that time, such a thing had occurred between her and Yang Yi because of the violet mink, and she'd almost killed him after that. We definitely can't give up. And Nanjing can help him, and so can I. Xiao Yushi's eyes were filled with determination. Being unable to help Yang Yi had always been something that bothered her. So she'd been working even harder than Xianxia and Su Qingsha. Su Qingsha nodded, and then she gazed at Yang Ye's room and said, I hope we won't be always standing behind him and being protected by him in the future. I hope we'll be able to fight by his side instead. Yang Yi sat cross-legged in the room with his eyes shut tight while he ceaselessly absorbed the remaining blood essence of the dragon ancestor and the 3 divine beasts. If it was any other ordinary person, then it would definitely be impossible to absorb all of it with such ease. After all, the energy within the blood essence was extremely violent. So, not to mention absorbing them, an ordinary person wouldn't even dare to swallow such blood essence. The reason Yang Yi didn't fear them was mainly because his body had been tempered by primordial violet energy, so it could endure the violent energy within the blood essence. As he ceaselessly absorbed the energy within the blood essence, the bones and meridians within her were gradually undergoing a transformation. The transformation he experienced wasn't just limited to an internal transformation, and even his body was ceaselessly transforming. If someone was here, that person would notice that Yang Ye's body was gradually expanding right now. Physical strength was extremely important to Yang Yi. The reason he could execute Heavenrend and even overlap it wasn't solely due to his formidable sword intent. There was another reason, and that was his physical strength. Regardless of whether it was drawing his sword or the speed he drew his sword, both required physical strength. The stronger his body was, the greater the amount of times he could draw his sword, and the speed he drew his sword would increase as well. So, physical strength was extremely important to Yang Yi. Time elapsed slowly, and a month passed by in a blink of the eye. Many things occurred during this period. Ding Xiaoyao led the army of the Southern Territory and advanced to the capital of the exalted Han Empire without any difficulty. However, for some unknown reason, Ding Xiaoyao didn't choose to attack the city, and she garrisoned the army outside the capital instead. Besides that, Qin Bufan made an appearance in the Devil Territory, and then the Devil Territory lost over 10 Monarch Realm experts. The Demon Saint pursued Qin Bufan like a madman, but Qin Bufan was still alive until this day. The most terrifying part was that Qin Bufan's strength was improving at a terrifying rate. The only area without any events or movements was the Northern Territory and Oceanic clans. There had been no subsequent action from the Northern Territory after Xianxia returned there. As for the Oceanic clans, they'd retreated deep into the ocean when they found out that their half-saint had abandoned them for the hallowed grounds, and they kept their distance from the land. So, up until this point in time, the entire continent seemed to be completely calm and peaceful. Another 15 days passed. Yang Yi was still absorbing the blood essence of the 3 divine beasts and the dragon ancestor in his room. If someone was here, that person would notice that Yang Yi was much taller and robust than before. It was especially so for his body. It seemed like terrifying strength was contained within him, and he seemed to be filled with explosive force. Bang! Suddenly, Yang Ye's clothes exploded apart while strands of an extremely terrifying aura swept out from him. And then Yang Ye's room instantly collapsed from the force of it. Everyone within the city was shocked. No one is allowed within an area of 50 kilometers from here. Anyone who remains after 3 breaths of time will be killed without mercy. And Bairu's icy cold voice resounded. And then everyone in the vicinity instantly left. Yang Yi took a deep breath, and a wisp of excitement flashed through his eyes as he gazed at the changes that had occurred throughout his entire body. After he absorbed the blood essence of the dragon ancestor and 3 divine beasts, his physical body was at least 50% stronger than before. At this moment, he could overlap Heavenrend 5 times at least. If that was enhanced by the critical strike technique, then he could even fight a 9th-rank Monarch Realm expert. When he thought up to this point, a thought suddenly appeared in Xianxia's mind. Xiaoqi said that I would only be able to open the 2nd level of the Primordial Pagoda after I attain the Monarch Realm, but my current strength isn't inferior to the Monarch Realm at all. Does that mean that I'm able to access the 2nd level? Xiangyi pondered deeply for a moment before he decided to give it a try. Xiangyi entered the Primordial Pagoda and arrived at the entrance to the 2nd level. The entrance was covered in a thin violet energy barrier, and Xiangyi had no choice but to use force if he wanted to enter the 2nd level. Xiangyi didn't start to attack the energy barrier. He stood on the spot and gazed at everything around him, and as he sensed the vast and ancient aura that came from all around him, Xiangyi felt extremely tiny for the very first time in his life. Yet the thing which made him feel very tiny was just a pagoda. Xiangyi was unable to imagine exactly how strong the ones who'd created and possessed this pagoda in the past were. Just Saint Realm experts possessed the ability to overturn oceans and obliterate the world, so what about them? How strong would they be? At this point, Xiangyi understood a principle. The stronger he became, the heavier his responsibilities would be, and his enemies would grow even more formidable. He'd once dreamed of a peaceful life, but it was actually such a joke. Not to mention the world outside Profounder Continent, it wasn't just impossible to live a peaceful life on the continent without formidable strength. Even surviving was a huge problem. Even if one didn't offend others, it didn't represent that others would never give offense instead. Once that happened and one lacked sufficient strength, then one would have no choice but to endure bullying and humiliation. One wouldn't have the right to reason with others without sufficient strength. Reason was held in the hands of the strong, and only the strong had the right to control their own lives. That was how cruel reality was. Once he figured all of this out, Xiangyi suddenly felt that his mental state had undergone a fine change. The clarity of mind and the lack of burden and bewilderment in his thoughts allowed his mental state to improve naturally, and this improvement was extremely beneficial to his cultivation, especially to his sword intent and sword domain. Of course, it was definitely impossible for him to rely solely on the improvement of his mental state to attain an advancement with the level of attainment in sword intent that he possessed right now. At the very most, it could only make his sword intent grow even sharper. Xiangyi discarded the distracting thoughts in his mind, stretched out his hand, and made a grasping motion. An intense sword formed within his grasp before he sheathed it, and then the sword intent and profound energy within him surged madly into the ancient sheath. The ancient sheath started to tremble violently before rays of light flashed out from it. A moment of silence ensued. OM! A sword howl shot into the sky, and then a ray of violet sword energy flashed before an explosion resounded. The violet energy barrier suddenly erupted with dazzling violet light and sword energy. A short while passed before both the violet light and sword energy dispersed. Xiangyi's pupils constricted because the violet energy barrier was still there. Besides a few practically unnoticeable cracks, the entire barrier seemed as if it hadn't been struck at all. At this moment, Xiangyi finally understood why Xiaoqi had said that he only had a chance at accessing the 2nd level after he attained the Monarch Realm. It was because the violet energy barrier was truly too terrifying. After all, that attack he executed contained 5 Heavenrends that were overlapped together, and he'd even activated the 3rd stage of critical strike. Even then, only a few fine cracks had appeared on the violet energy barrier. Xiangyi took a deep breath. Should I give up or continue? Xiangyi was very well aware that it was clearly quite impossible for him to destroy the violet energy barrier with his current strength. Perhaps he could succeed upon attaining the Monarch Realm. However, he was truly unwilling to give up just like that. He would definitely give up decisively if he didn't have even the slightest chance. Because it was obviously extremely foolish to waste time on something that was utterly impossible. However, he wasn't completely without a chance. Those fine cracks on the barrier were the best proof. Xiangyi didn't hesitate for long before he decided that he would give it his all. The battle that occurred over a month ago allowed him to realize how strong the Hallowed Grounds and the Defiant Profounders were. Even if they had Elder Mu on their side, the Southern Territory would still suffer casualties because Elder Mu was just one person, and he would suffer injuries as well. He could imagine how chaotic the world would become once the defiant Profounders escaped from the seal. At that time, he would be completely helpless without formidable strength. Moreover, he didn't want to always rely on Elder Mu. Coupled with the fact that he'd forcefully abandoned his charge into the Monarch realm and missed the chance to attain the Monarch realm, he'd decided to give it his all. Yang Yi immediately draconified his hands into dragon claws, and then he sheathed the intense sword against before swiftly drawing it. Yang Yi executed Heaven Rend over and over again. Just like that. Of course, he couldn't execute it without end. Fortunately, he still had a good amount of extreme-grade energy stones, so he absorbed the energy within them after executing a few overlapped Heaven Rends, and he continued once more when he'd recovered sufficient profound energy. Besides Heaven Rend, Yang Yi summoned the natural treasures as well, and he ordered them to attack the violet energy barrier with all their might. However, the effects of such attacks weren't very obvious, but it was better than nothing. Just like that, they attacked over and over again, and 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Even though the barrier hadn't been destroyed by Yang Ye's continuous effort, there were many more cracks on it. While the results weren't very ideal, Yang Yi worked even harder because he'd seen a glimmer of hope. So long as he had hope, then why would he not work harder? Of course, he had to pay a price for doing so. Days and nights of continuously attacking the barrier like a madman hadn't just caused Yang Yi to be on the verge of mental exhaustion. He was even on the verge of physical exhaustion. However, Yang Yi noticed that his attainments in Heaven Rend had improved, and it was displayed in the speed that he drew his sword. Even though he was still only capable of drawing 5 times in succession, it still gave Yang Yi a huge pleasant surprise because it allowed him to realize that practice makes perfect. Yang Yi became completely immersed in a state of constant drawing. At this moment, he seemed like he'd forgotten that his objective wasn't to improve his attainments in Heaven Rend, but to enter the second level of the pagoda. Half a month later, Yang Ye's incessant painstaking efforts finally allowed him to execute Heaven Rend 6 times in succession. This time, Yang Yi didn't continue attacking the violet energy barrier. He sat down cross-legged instead and started to absorb the energy within the extreme-grade energy stones. Yang Yi finally returned to his peak state a day later. A ferocious expression flashed through his eyes as he gazed at the violet energy barrier, and then he swiftly drew the intense sword within the ancient sheath. OM! A sword howl resounded as a ray of violet sword energy collided with the violet energy barrier. A moment of silence ensued. Bang! An enormous explosion resounded as the entire violet energy barrier exploded apart and transformed into specks of violet light that covered the sky as they descended throughout the surroundings. The violet barrier dispersed, and a pavilion appeared before Yang Ye's eyes. The pavilion had just a single floor, and it wasn't large. It was only around 30 m in both length and width. There were 3 words inscribed right at the top of its entrance: Pavilion of Alchemy. A place to refine pills? Yang Yi frowned a little. Actually, he wasn't really fond of medicinal pills. There were medicinal pills in the continent as well, but their effects were minimal. Especially after one attained a certain level of cultivation, the effects of medicinal pills were practically unnoticeable. Moreover, profounders who improve their strengths via medicinal pills would possess strengths that are greatly inferior to profounders who cultivated normally. In short, even though there were medicinal pills in the continent, no one attached any importance to them. So, the status of alchemists was far inferior to talisman masters, and thus there were only a few alchemists throughout the continent. Yang Yi stood on the spot and pondered deeply for a moment, and then he pushed open the door and walked in. Before his eyes were numerous bookshelves, and they were all around the room. There were rows upon rows of bamboo scroll holders on the shelves, while an enormous furnace resided at the center of the room. On the ground beneath the furnace was a circular stone platform which was partially black and partially white, and there was a black and a white circle on the stone platform as well. The stone platform supported the furnace while 4 fist-sized iron chains chained the top of the furnace from 4 different sides. Yang Ye's gaze stopped on the stone platform for a moment before he gazed at the furnace. And there were 3 words inscribed on the top of the furnace: 8 trigrams furnace. Besides that, There was a ball of dark red flames burning within the furnace. Xianxia's pupils constricted when he laid eyes on the flames. At the same time, the nether ghost flame suddenly emerged from within him and hid behind him. Xianxia sensed that the nether ghost flame was terrified and showing submission. It was even more terrified than when it met Lei Lin that day. What exactly is this flame? Why is it capable of making the nether ghost flame feel such terror? Why is it capable of making me feel a terribly strong sense of danger from it? Xianxia wasn't able to wrap his head around it no matter how he racked his brain. Xianxia shook his head and stopped thinking about it. His gaze moved past the furnace and descended onto a rack carved from jade that stood behind the furnace. Atop the rack were rows of white-colored jade bottles, and there were over 100 there. Xianxia was delighted by this scene, and he flashed over to the jade rack. He looked carefully and noticed that they were actually jade bottles that were made to store medicinal pills, and they were labeled with the names and effects of the pills they contained. Xianxia's gaze swept through them before finally descending onto a comparatively small jade bottle on the left. Soul Pill 3rd grade. Repairs, strengthens, and fuses the soul. Xianxia was overjoyed when he saw that. After all, Xiaoqi had fallen into deep sleep because her soul had been damaged, and this pill just happened to be capable of repairing her soul. In other words, she might be able to awaken if he gave it to her. Xianxia didn't hesitate to grab it, but he was immediately stunned on the spot. It's empty? Xianxia hurriedly opened it up, and it was completely empty. What's going on? Xianxia frowned, and then he took another jade bottle yet noticed it was empty as well. So he took another, but it was still empty. It wasn't long before Xianxia noticed that all the jade bottles on the jade rack were empty. They're all empty. How am I to treat Xiaoqi? A strand of panic arose in his heart. The reason he desperately attempted to enter the 2nd level was because the medicinal pills here could save Xiaoqi. However, they were all empty. There wasn't even a single pill here. Could it be that I really have to wait over 100 years for her to wake up? 100 years. This won't do. Anything can happen. Who knows if anything might happen to her during the next 100 years? Xianxia took a deep breath, and then he gazed at the bookshelves and said, "Since there are no pills, then I'll make them myself. Regardless of success, I still have to give it a try." Xianxia walked over to one of the bookshelves as he spoke, and then he started looking through the bamboo scrolls. There were all sorts of things recorded on them, like medicinal materials, springs, and even ores and all sorts of other strange and exotic things. However, all of them were more or less related to alchemy. Xianxia didn't look through them in detail because he didn't need them for now. He searched for over 2 hours before he finally found what he needed. Basics of Pill Refinement, a comprehensive collection of alchemy, a detailed guide. Xianxia was overjoyed when he found them because they provided information on how to refine pills. It was especially so for the comprehensive collection of alchemy. Within it was the detailed methods to refine numerous medicinal pills and their respective effects, and it simply astounded Xianxia and caused his heart to palpitate with desire. For example, the medicinal pill called Violet Extreme was capable of instantly providing 50 years of cultivation, and it came without any side effects. Besides that, the Immortal pill of 9 transformations had even more astounding effects. It was simply capable of providing effects akin to rebirth. Even if one had been killed and only a strand of that person's soul remained, consuming the Immortal pill of 9 transformations would be sufficient to condense that person's soul again and allow that person to be reborn. Besides those 2 pills, there were many other miraculous pills that simply seemed impossible to him. Xianxia kept his doubts towards them because their effects were truly too heaven-defying. Even though he was quite doubtful, Xianxia still decided to give it a try. Of course, he didn't intend to try refining the Violet Extreme pill or the Immortal pill of 9 transformations. After all, he hadn't even heard of the materials they required, let alone refine them. Moreover, based on the introduction provided on the bamboo scrolls, even if he possessed the ingredients, it was impossible for him to refine them successfully with the strength he possessed right now. He intended to try refining the soul pill. Of course, he wasn't stupid enough to start immediately. He had to gain an understanding of the Tao of alchemy before that. Fortunately, the scroll Alchemy A detailed guide provided a detailed introduction to the Tao of alchemy, and there were even annotations within it. So he was able to comprehend it at a glance. Yang Yi found out that alchemists were just like talisman masters, and they were divided by grades like junior, intermediate, advanced, master, and grandmaster alchemists. Besides that, pills were divided into mortal pills, spirit pills, saint pills, immortal pills, and divine pills. Every single one of them were divided into 3 grades. Junior alchemists could only refine mortal pills. According to Yang Ye's estimations, such medicinal pills were only effective for profounders at the king realm and below. As for those above the king realm, such pills merely provided minimal effects. Intermediate alchemists could refine spirit pills, and such pills had quite great effects. At the very least, they were effective when consumed by spirit realm and exalt realm experts. As for advanced alchemists, they could refine saint pills. According to the descriptions of such pills, they were useful to the monarch realm and half-saint realms at least. Moreover, they were very effective when consumed by profounders of those realms of cultivation. For example, the violet extreme pill was a saint pill, and it provided 50 years of cultivation in an instant. If such a pill really existed, then Yang Yi was certain that it would definitely make countless monarch realm experts fight for it. Besides that, there was a saint pill called the lifespan pill. It couldn't improve a profounder's cultivation, but it could provide a profounder with an extra 50 years of lifespan. Yang Yi firmly believed that if such a pill did exist in the world, then countless monarch realm experts would definitely fight madly for it, and it was even to the extent that half-saints might fight for it as well. After all, it was 50 years of lifespan. It was definitely something that a profounder who'd reached a bottleneck in his cultivation and didn't possess much lifespan left would stop at nothing to obtain. Of course, Yang Yi couldn't dream of refining such a pill right now, because the conditions required were beyond difficult for Yang Yi. Not to mention anything else, he hadn't even seen a single one of the materials that were required. However, Yang Ye's main objective now wasn't a saint pill but a spirit pill, because the soul pill was within the scope of spirit pills. Yang Yi was quite worried because the little girl's strength was at the monarch realm at least, but the soul pill was only a spirit pill, so its effects on monarch realm experts was clearly quite minuscule. But he had no other choice now and could only give it a try. Something worthy of mentioning was that alchemy wasn't something just anyone could accomplish. There was a prerequisite to refining pills, and it was related to profound energy. The profound energy of an alchemist had to be of the 5 elements, and not a single element lesser. Such a requirement was countless times harsher than the requirements to become a talisman master. Why was profound energy of all 5 elements required? It was because alchemy was related to all 5 elements. For example, it required flames that represented fire in the 5 elements, it required medicinal materials which represented wood, it required spirit springs that represented water, it required a furnace that represented metal. In short, the 5 elements had an interpromoting relationship, so one had to grasp the energy of the 5 elements to refine medicinal pills, because only then could one regulate the energy of the various elements within a pill. Yang Yi didn't possess profound energy of the 5 elements, but he possessed violet energy instead. Even though his violet energy couldn't be considered as primordial violet energy now, violet energy definitely far surpassed profound energy of the 5 elements. So, Yang Yi conformed to the requirements to become an alchemist. After that, Yang Yi started studying pill refinement on his own. It was naturally an extremely difficult task. Fortunately, those 3 bamboo scrolls from before had very detailed annotations and explanations, so he wasn't completely lost. Otherwise, it would definitely be impossible for him to study on his own and start refining pills. Yang Yi stayed in the pagoda for half a month, just like that. He tried to refine some basic pills throughout this time, but every single attempt ended in failure. This allowed him to realize that pill refinement was much more difficult than crafting talismans, and it was absolutely not something he could master in a short period. 10 more days passed. Yang Yi completed his studies of the basics of pill refinement and alchemy, a detailed guide. But right when he was about to try and refine a pill again, something had occurred on the continent, and he had no choice but to leave the pagoda. Another defiant profounder has escaped, and he came to Profounder Continent. Just a little while ago, he killed 3 of our Monarch Realm experts who were garrisoned in the Central Territory. He's killing anyone he sees. And Bairu gazed at Yang Yi as she spoke solemnly. A defiant profounder. A cold glow flashed through Yang Ye's eyes, and then his figure flashed and vanished on the spot.